In this video, I'm going to demonstrate how I use the Beaver spoon carving kit to make this heart spoon that I carved out of mahogany. I chose a heart-shaped bowl and an interlocking heart design at the top, and I have to say using these tools was super easy and smooth. I kind of demo how the tools work and explain my process of how I did this carving. I begin with about a ½ inch thick piece of mahogany, and I cover it up with some painter's tape. This way, when I sprayed my adhesive for my design, it doesn't gunk up the wood and make it all sticky. So I use a spray adhesive and put my design and make sure it's on there real well, so when I start cutting out my saw, the design doesn't lift up. I drill some holes so I can get my saw blade in for the inside cuts. It's best to start with the inside cuts because it's more stable inside the hunk. If I were to cut it out first and then do the inside cuts, it makes it more fragile and more potential to break. So I'm really excited. Beaver Tools reached out to me and they sent me this kit. It's a spoon carving kit. I just opened it up. I tested out a couple chips. Got the Sloyd knife, which is nice and really sharp all the way down. It has a scoop knife, which is really great for scooping out the bowls of a spoon. It's nice and sharp. I've never used a tool like this. This is the first day I'm trying it. It's really interesting. You kind of scoop it out like you're scooping out some ice cream or something. And it has this bent gouge, which again, I'm really excited. I have some bent tools, but not a bent gouge like this, and I'm really excited to use this. I could see using this in a lot of projects, especially something like spoon carving. All right, so it kind of works the same. I hold it upside down. Just careful, and you kind of just use this also to scoop at your wrist. So you go in one direction. I'm going across the grain here, and you scoop out the other direction, and then I'll now go with the grain. You can see it cuts really nice, and you can get that nice bowl shape that if you're making a spoon, and I guess if you're even carving a bowl, you can use this to clean out. So it's really nice. It cuts pretty clean. Actually, it cuts very clean. I'm just carving a little bit sloppy. So again, it's a really nice kit. Constructed well. I like the simple design. The knife's a little bigger than I'm used to holding, but it fits really nice in my hand. I could see really great for roughing out pieces, and even using the tip to get some nice detail cuts too. So I always get more excited about the knives than anything. I love a good knife. All right. So now that I'm more acquainted with the tools I'll be using, I start to look at my spoon and I draw on an edge to the bowl. This is important because if you don't do this, you kind of tend to just scoop away, and then your bowl will be very shallow. So it's a little hard to see with my big hand in the way, but I'm just using the bent gouge to start scooping out the inside of the bowl. Careful, because I want that heart shape, so I'm careful that in the middle of the spoon I'm going to leave a bit of an indentation, and that will give this a little more character to the spoon. So I'm just really careful to get started on the bowl, and then I'll eventually switch over to the hook knife. Now it's a little awkward using this because again I'm trying to keep the inside heart shape. If this were just a normal spoon, I would probably be a little more aggressive, but I'm just taking my time to make sure I have the shape of the spoon that I want with that heart in mind. With the inside of the spoon finished, I flip the spoon over and I draw a vertical center line and also one going horizontally. This helps me find a center point. Now I can draw in some arrows to help visualize which way I should carve the spoon out to give it a nice bowl shape. I also include a center line on the side of the spoon to help me visualize how far up the bowl needs to be. So I do this because I don't want to take too much wood off, or else the bowl will be too shallow and I can get a hole. So that's just, all these lines are just to help reinforce and keep me mentally aware of the cuts I'm about to make. Just instead of just hacking right into it, you got to do some planning. Using my knife, I begin slicing away the wood up to that center line that I drew all around the spoon. I turn the spoon just to make sure I'm not too aggressive in one area so it can be a nice even shape all the way around. As you can see, I'm using my thumb to help the knife slide through the wood. This gives you more control and lets me hold the spoon because it's very fragile, and if you're too aggressive, it will break. Using this mahogany, and all wood's similar, the grain will change, so I'm changing my technique of carving it too. So sometimes I'm pushing the knife with my thumb, other times I'll turn it and kind of pull the knife into me. And I'll point this out again later in the carve. I find it very helpful to take my time carving the inside of the spoon, flipping it over, carving the other side. This way I can make sure it's a nice even shape. If you carve too much away, you can put a hole in the spoon, or it can be too thin and fragile. So I'm constantly flipping back and forth, carving the inside, flipping it, doing the other side. I'm also starting now to mark in where I want the handle. As I mentioned, these spoons can be very fragile, so I keep the handle as thick as possible while I'm doing some more of the heavy carving, like scooping in out of the bowl. But now I'm feeling a little more confident, so I can start cutting in those lines, and it's going to help the carving progress. This part of the carving is always fun. As you can see, the bottom of the spoon is pretty flat, and since I'm confident that I won't cut through the spoon, I can take some bigger chunks out and really round the shape of this, and it's always pretty satisfying to get those nice chips out and give a round shape. I'm still being cautious and flipping back and forth, always taking a gauge. So now I'm back on the other side using the scoop knife just to keep scooping out. So earlier I mentioned that the grain could sometimes be a little tricky on this mahogany. And as you can see right here, I was trying to force the cut and the wood just was not cutting nicely. So whenever you come across a problem like this, the best thing to do is just take small, more precise cuts, turn the wood if you need to, and find that grain pattern. It's an easy fix for me, luckily, but I can only advise that just take your time. When you start hacking away at wood and going too fast, that's a lot of times when mistakes happen. Carving is a slow process, no rush, and if you take your time and try and follow that grain, you'll get a much nicer carving in the end. Now that I'm pretty happy with the depth of the spoon, the shape on the back, I'm starting to look at the handle. As you can see, I'm still not going too aggressive. I still want to have some stability for when I carve the features and the hearts at the top of the spoon, but I do want to start getting the final shape because I'm nearing towards the end of this carving when I start doing the top of the spoon. So now I'm going to do these interlocking hearts. At this point I have to determine which heart is going to be closest and then where that little knot's going to come into play. So I'm going to make really shallow stop cuts to begin and make sure I'm happy with my cut. If I go too deep, I can't take it back. So I do shallow, make sure this is the idea that I'm envisioning, and then once I'm confident, I'll go back in and start taking out more. As you can see, I'm just taking real little chips out, making a stop cut, carving away. It's very fragile, and I'm still not 100% confident when I do these interlocking designs. I don't know why. As you'll see later in the video, it's just something, I get a little mental block, so I'm just taking my time with these. I'm going back down, rounding the handle, and looking these as a whole to make sure it looks good as an entire piece. After carving out the part of the heart that's going to be furthest out, I'm starting now to carve back, so it's going to give that appearance that the hearts are knotted together. So I wanted to point out again how important it is to stay mindful while carving. As you can see, my knife gets caught in the wood, but instead of forcing the cut, I just changed the direction and I'm easily able to get that chip out. Too often when I first started carving, I would always try and force through those cuts, and I would make these mistakes that were really hard to repair, especially at this point of the carving where I'm doing some of the finer detail work. So I finally feel pretty happy with the way the front of the spoon is coming out. I have this nice heart kind of interlocking. You can see that this one comes from behind and then over and back behind again. So it's time to now make some decisions on what to do on the back of the carving, and I'm just having a real mental block trying to figure this out. I've done interlocking designs before and I always feel the same way. I'm hoping one day I can get over this mentally, but I just have a really tough time envisioning it. So I'm just kind of turning it back and forth, trying to draw my lines in before I make any cuts that I'll regret later, and just doing a lot of looking and feeling frustrated. It's funny with wood carving. Sometimes something that you just can't see will all of a sudden click and it becomes obvious. So with all the main carving out of the way, it's time to clear out some chips and get ready for some finer details. I'm really happy with the way the shape is looking, and I'm excited to get this cleaned up and sanded and filed and make it nice and smooth all throughout. So I start with some files. I use some flat files just to kind of remove the tool marks from the saw that I wasn't able to get with the knife, and just to help kind of round out some of the pieces. I was noticing while I carved, I was starting to get kind of brittle around the hearts, and I just did not want to make too many cuts and accidentally split them, so I figured filing and sanding would do the job just as well, just might take a little bit longer. As you can see, I didn't put my tools away just yet. There's always going to be a spot where a knife or a chisel will help out a lot more, a lot faster than sandpaper or a file can. Once I'm happy with the filing and any last minute adjustments I made, it's time to start the sanding. Now I'm not going to put too much of this in the video because there's nothing more boring than sanding except watching somebody sand. But I'll just let you know real quick, I go through a system. I start at 80 grit, I go to 120, 150, 220, and on this carving I stopped at 320 to give it a real nice finish. At 220, I also start to dampen the wood. I'll wet it down with a nice wet paper towel just to raise the grain, and then I'll bring it back down with 220, and I'll do that twice with a 220 grit, twice with a 320 grit. The final step is applying a finish. This is a purely decorative spoon, so I'm not worried about it being food safe. But if you were carving a spoon that you planned on using in the kitchen, I definitely recommend using a food safe finish. But for this one I used the Howard's Feed and Wax, and I just use my fingers to work it onto the wood, and then Once I got to the crevices where I couldn't reach, I switched to a small paintbrush and used that to get into all the nooks and crannies. After I let the spoon sit for about 20 minutes, I take an old t-shirt and just wipe off any excess finish that's on there. As you can see, the finish really brings out the nice, warm, rich tones of the mahogany and helps that grain pop out a little bit. Thanks for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it and learned something and enjoyed seeing my process of carving a spoon. And a big thanks to Beaver Craft Tools for sending these tools to me. I've really enjoyed them and I can't wait to use them on more projects to come. And of course, if you could like, comment, and subscribe to this channel, I'd really appreciate it. Thanks again.